Good afternoon, everybody, and I am joined here today. Welcome to the Political No-Brainer podcast, where we move past winner takes all politics and into real conversation. Today, I'm excited to be here with Jason Pack, and Jason Pack is a Middle East expert. One of the things we're going to talk about today is the hot topic of all. Of course, it is the premier topic, and it should be, is Iran. Iran is a complex issue, but I believe we jumped into a decision to go into war with Iran. This administration jumped into a decision. I think many administrations considered the option of war and chose not to. And I think that was the right decision. The Obama administration chose to work out an agreement. And I don't think it was flawless. And I think the new Obama administration, of course, gave every next president the option of backing out of that agreement. The Trump administration backed out of it. But Jason, why don't you just jump in and just start with us? The experience you have is incredible. You've lived all over the Middle East. You've worked all over, and you've got this expertise. And I don't want to consume the show. I want you to jump right in.
Well, you're right. The American president always has the opportunity to engage in war or regime change with non-nuclear states that it has a disagreement, whether it's states that fund terror, like Iran, states that might be pursuing biological or chemical weapons, as in Libya. And diplomacy is going to be harder than war, but its fruits may be more long lasting. The end game of the current US Israel war on Iran will no doubt have to be diplomacy. There is no purely military solution. We have to remember that even the greatest wars of the 20th century, World War I and World War II, they ended with some kind of diplomacy. And that was multilateral peace conferences. So you can't, even if you're going to use military force, end a conflict without strategic aims. Are those strategic aims, in the Iranian case, denuclearization? Are they limiting the ballistic missile program? Are they, reassuring the freedom of navigation in the Straits of Hormuz? It's very clear that we entered this military enterprise without, clearly defined strategic goals. So there were tactical opportunities, such as decapitating the Iranian leadership, killing 47 of the top military and theocratic officials in the country. So that's a tactical goal. And they, as the opening salvo of the war, they killed them. And they've blown up many ballistic missile factories. But to what end? What's the strategy? So, we're sitting and we're talking in the middle of April. In theory, there's a ceasefire. Negotiations are off, then they're on, then they're off, then they're on. To what end?
So, and that's like you said, to what and what is the military goal? So let's be realistic here. Let's start with the initial strike in Iran, these giant bunker busting bombs
I'm sorry to interrupt. Bunker busters have not been used in this conflict.
okay, but these giant bombs, I apologize, to take out the initial strike was to take
Yep.
out the three tunnels that had enriched uranium. And
Oh, that's a different war. That's the 12-day
right,
war.
that
But
was the initial strike, right?
okay. I mean, they're seen as two discrete conflicts, but
I apologize. Yes. Okay. So let's start there. So, but my only where I was landing with that is there was rumor had it that they knew that strike was coming, and they may have moved some of that enriched uranium out of those particular areas. And then, how do we know where we're getting with this? How do we know what we're decimating as far as their capabilities militarily?
interesting. So I think one, it's a conceptual error to conflate the actions of the 12-day war in June 2025 with the joint US Israeli military operation from late February to now in 2026. Their objectives, as well as their proximal causes and the legal casus belli for them, again, couldn't be more different. You, you're talking about the American entrance into the 12-day war, and that's something that I supported. The use of the B-2s to drop bunker busters on Fardao and Natanz was very successful. It doesn't matter that it was telegraphed, and yes, it was telegraphed, so that the Iranians could, in a face-saving way, minimize casualties. But by hitting their centrifuges and other aspects of their nuclear program, it was very difficult for them to restart the enrichment of weapons-grade uranium. Do you know what I mean? And the logic of that was, in theory, to go to negotiations. Those negotiations were botched for a whole range of reasons, and we can talk about the psychology of Witkoff and Jared Kushner, how they may have different agendas than the president and J.D. Vance and some others and Rubio. In other words, we're dealing with multiple different parts of the administration here. That's quite different than this war, which started with the killing of a sovereign head of state, just like we kidnapped a sovereign head of state in Venezuela. And that's clearly, illegal under international law. There are provisions that protect sovereign heads of countries from being kidnapped or assassinated. So we're in a very different kind of position here because we've started a war by killing the head of state of an enemy country.
And like you said, first of all, there's international law that says much of this is illegal. We've also got the issue of the war we're in now with Iran has not been approved by Congress, and that hasn't been addressed either. So we're in a position where we look at a president that swings the bat harder than any other president, but yet and still, I guess some American people support that. But what happens in the end? What is the net result of these actions?
So let me address 2 points here. I host the Disorder podcast, which is I'll take that again. I assume this is edited. I host the Disorder podcast, which focuses on solutions, as I know is important to you. And we talk about how to order the disorder that we find ourselves in. In the first episode that I did with my co-host Jane Kinnenmont, we debated the importance of the illegality of the war under international law as opposed to its illegality under U.S. law, i.e. that it doesn't have congressional authorization as a War Powers Act. And I think that the lack of congressional authorization is more important, not only in a domestic U.S. sense, but in an international sense. The reason why it's so important to have a congressional declaration of war or congressional approval for authorization of the use of military force, as it's called, AUMF, is that delimits enemies and objectives, right? So after 9/11, we said, although the Taliban didn't blow up the buildings, the Taliban harbored Osama bin Laden and a range of al-Qaeda operatives. Ergo, we think it's legal and legitimate to invade Afghanistan to depose the regime that harbored these jihadists. When we go to the Iraq War in 2003, there was, to some extent, a lie which allowed the congressional justification that Saddam Hussein was trying to build nuclear weapons and had uranium from Niger. However, although there was that lie and its British variation in the House of Commons, both those bodies, the House of Commons and Congress, came up with the strategy and the goals of the war, although it was based on a fib. This current war, because Trump didn't go to Congress in advance, it has no goal. The access of going to elected representatives and making a case for something then forces you to delimit. Is it a regime change war? Is it a punishment for killing the protesters? Because Trump has given that justification, right? The Iranians have killed their protesters, ergo we're attacking them. Well, that's a very different war than a regime change war. Is it a war about just ending their nuclear program? By his not going to Congress, I fear that we are in the worst post-Cold War military situation that the Western countries have ever found themselves in, which is they're embroiled in an unending conflict without a clear sense of what victory or defeat would be. So that I see this as worse than the Iraq War. We had certain objectives in Iraq which were based on lies and we failed to achieve, but there were at least objectives. We're now caught in a unending military adventure where the objectives are not clear. The Israelis have objectives which have been laid out, and those are actually much more rational than what the American objectives might be.
And like you said, with Iraq, we had an alliance around the world. We really don't have much cooperation around the world with this war at all. Actually, we do have Israel on our side very much so, and they do have objectives and they do have concerns. But my point has been is one, we're doing most of the heavy lifting.
That's not fully true. I think that is a hard right kind of Tucker Carlson talking point. The Israelis dragged us into war again. I would say from the intelligence perspective, the Israelis actually do most of the heavy lifting. We have done the things that they can't do. It's a small country of 10 million people. We have, the most sophisticated military on earth and therefore are able to physically drop more bombs and have more aircraft carriers. But when it comes to the precise targeteering and some of the more challenging intercepts and things, the Israelis do actually do the more technically challenging part of the war.
And they're very good at that. Their military is enormous. It's not enormous. It's sophisticated in an enormous way. And we do learn from them. We do work with them, and we do train their soldiers, and ultimately our people are trained from them as well. And I understand the alliance, and I understand, but like we've been in this tug of war with Iran for the longest time. And every president up till this president has decided the best thing to not do is go to war. But like you said, we're in this war now. And my question is again, solution based. What does Donald Trump do next? Does he just say we've achieved our goals and walk away from it? And where does that leave us? That's my biggest
concern. We need to
now.
introduce military strategy here, from Sun Tzu to Clausewitz. You cannot engage in war if you do not have concrete political aims. Clausewitz says war is politics by other means. Donald has not articulated what our objective is. Is it regime change? Is it punishing the Iranians for killing their own people? Is it eliminating their nuclear program? Is it eliminating their ability to harm Israel and fund terrorists, meaning both ballistics and ability to fund Hezbollah and the Houthis? Or is there some BS post facto justification that the war is now about opening the Straits of Hormuz, even though the straits were open before the war started? So I've given 5 different potential justifications until we can have a clear case that is consistently made, not only to Congress, but to the American people and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We can't possibly achieve the aim. The aim cannot be all 5 of these things, because you would go about a military campaign very differently if it was objective 2 as opposed to objective 5. And would I like to see the back of the Ayatollahs? Yes. Would I like to see their ability to fund and arm Hezbollah and the Houthis eviscerated or at least mitigated? Yes. I've spent a lot of my career working on these issues, and I lived in Lebanon and I was in Syria for many years. There is a case for weakening the Iranians' ability to have proxies throughout the region. And the Israelis have done a very systematic job of that since October 7th. But I don't see how this military campaign achieves that aim, because where we're looking at things on April 14th, after the first round of negotiations in Pakistan have failed, the Iranians are in a much, much stronger negotiating position than they were before the war started.
Right. And when you look at that, when you consider that, and you consider J.D. Vance was saying we just had 11 hours of negotiations and we got nowhere, it's because they're in a stronger position. What happens next? Now we're in a sort of a precarious position where they are in a better position to negotiate. And yet the administration is saying clearly we're not willing to give an inch. We want every concession from the beginning. And we were maybe in a position to get more concessions before this.
So I'd like to go back to the issue of the congressional justifications for war and the American tradition of just war theory. America is a very blessed country. It has mostly peaceful relations with its neighbors, and it's surrounded by the 2 largest oceans on Earth. So we're in a very great, safe geographical position. We're not Belgium or Germany, open to being invaded by every side. And this has meant we can mostly do what Theodore Roosevelt counseled us in the late 19th and early 20th century: walk softly and carry a big stick. And that is what being a global hegemon post the fall of the Soviet Union is supposed to allow us to do. We have a big stick. We don't threaten people with it. But in the rare instances where we threaten them, to not use it, to then solve the problem through negotiations. And if you disliked the JCPOA, i.e. Obama's Iran deal, there was an ability to rebuild a coalition of our European allies, potentially as well the Chinese and the Russians, and hash out how much oil can they export, what are the sanctions going to be, what are dual use items, how are the inspections regime of these nuclear plants going to be. But we've had 2 rounds of negotiations, and during the rounds of negotiations, we've either attacked Iran, allowed the Israelis to attack Iran, or decapitated and assassinated their leadership. Who will ever negotiate with this administration again? Our ability to engage in any negotiations from Venezuela to North Korea is now, I don't know, the weakest we've seen in our lifetimes.
Because, like you just said, we're using negotiations basically as the cover of darkness. We're literally using negotiations to dupe people into laying their arms down for a minute and us attacking. We've seen that even in military exercises. The United States said we're going to participate in the military exercises, and then said we're not, and then fired a missile at an Iranian ship that was participating in the military. So now like you've said, you've not only got a credibility issue with this administration, you've got a long-term credibility issue. And again, I'm a solutions guy. That's my whole thing. I'm not looking to knock the Trump administration. Everybody thinks I'm anti-Trump. I'm not. Everybody wants the captain of the ship to succeed, to get it to port. But where are we at this point?
And this is what I like about your podcast, Coach. I didn't vote for the man, but once this war started, I wanted him to succeed and overthrow the Ayatollahs and have the greatest victory ever. Because the Middle East would be safer. Our ability to, steer the new regime in Syria towards not backing jihadis and having economic growth would be better. Our ability to work with our Gulfi allies and integrate them into a region where they accept Israel, all of that would be better. I am a bit stuck because I feel that many congressional Democrats and journalists of a Democratic persuasion have wanted Trump to fail the whole time. And many Republicans have wanted him to succeed so much that they ignore the facts and are willing to proclaim victory even while we're getting defeated. Where does this leave us? I think that we need to get our European allies on board and agree certain truths about navigation through the Straits of Hormuz, about sanctions of Iran and Iranian oil, about the movement of their funds, about all of the things that would have been good to do before we started this campaign. And we have no choice now. This is absolutely existential because the Russians are benefiting from increased oil prices. The Chinese are benefiting from a world that now requires their renewable technology like lithium batteries and solar and all of that. And we don't seem to have a coalition of our allies that we can work with to achieve our aims. So, yes, what can we do? I mean, people will say this is too naive, but a major conference. We get together with our NATO allies rather than saying we hate NATO and we're going to withdraw from NATO if you don't help us. Get together, our allies, the British, the French, the Germans, the Sunni Gulf powers, i.e., Saudi, UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, who have been intermediaries with us before, and we try to agree who's going to pay to rebuild this oil installation, how are we going to tax this shipping, who's going to do these patrols, who's going to do the demining, and it's got to be horse trading. We live on the same planet. Do you know what I mean? There's no solution where we're not going to be balancing our interests and our allies' interests. It just can't happen.
So let's say that's not ideological, but for the next 2 years, it very much is. It very much. I don't see Trump suddenly getting an epiphany to say, you know what, I was all wrong about NATO. You know what, I was all wrong. Let's even say how wrong he was about Iran. I'm going to go far out of the 50 years ago when the Ayatollah took over Iran, coming from France, came back to Iran, he took over Iran. And like you said, the imams and the Ayatollahs are the issue. The people, the Ayatollah Khomeini himself asked his people to grow their race. Those babies are now 40 and 50 years old. They want a normalized relationship. It's a human gentrification that happened in Iran. That the JCP, the Joint Protection Agreement that Obama formed, enabled Iran to have money to really empower that feeling of Iran could be a nation that works with the world. And so we've decimated that ability. I was talking to Halil Zababi, who's about, I would say, 28 to 35-year-old woman from Iran, an Iranian activist, who said, we don't need weapons. We need communication stuff. We need to be able to communicate to ultimately, essentially ourselves, the Iranian people, overthrow these Ayatollahs and become, and we decimated that ability too. So now you're talking about rewiring everything.
Yep. And I want to jump in. It's very paradoxical. There has been so many years and months of covert preparation to be able to do a campaign like this. I'm wondering why the US did not have better relationships with the protesters and with dissident groups, so that in concert with the surprise military attack, there would have been a rising, not just of Kurds and Baluchis in the periphery, but of the youth and of, educated secular activists, of which Iran has a great civilization and so many people with foreign languages and interconnections in the West. And we have seen nothing. And this just confuses me, because this is what we have been preparing for decades. And did we just shoot our wad without even using our covert means? I'm really confused here.
Well, don't be so confused, because when you think about it, we've changed the Defense Department to the War Department. We've got a Secretary of Defense who I don't really think belongs in that position. And so, and I've said it from the beginning, he never even ran a McDonald's, and then suddenly he has a department with 3 million employees. And so, and this is an issue. And yesterday the question was asked by independent candidate for Mississippi, Ty Pinkins, how did he get confirmed? And the answer was because 50 Republicans rallied around like friends in a bar fight and decided this is how we're going to go about this. So the confusion isn't the fact that it's just absurd what we're doing, and it's absurd that we wasted everything. Like you said, we just shot our load on this big, allegedly, according to the neocons of America, sexy operation. But my question is, moving forward, just say J.D. Vance isn't the next president. Whomever is, I'm not going to speculate. Again, we just want the captain of the ship to succeed. We want the captain of the ship to bring the ship back. What does the next president do to bring back, when you think of the decimation of negotiations as an ability to, people don't trust us anymore. What do you do next?
This is a great question. And I want to go back to your previous interview with the independent candidate in Idaho, Achilles.
Todd Achilles.
America has to regain credibility in the world. We should have the Congress, whoever wins or loses, there's going to be enough independently minded people after the midterms, say, we've passed a new war powers resolution. Force cannot be used without congressional approval, except for these and these circumstances. And this would constrain the president, because before Nixon, the president was more constrained. Before Vietnam, we had a presidency which was not unhinged in its ability to use force. So why don't we have Congress spell out more what the role of Congress is and what the role of the president is? So that's one thing I'm going to mention. I think that we don't need an apology tour. We don't need to apologize for being America, but we should have a restart. If it's 2029, and I hope you and I are still talking then, we should discuss a conference which can happen in London. I think it probably can't happen in America, but a conference which can happen in London or Berlin or Sweden, whereby we are going to work together with our allies and say, we'd like an army of democracy. We're going to pay this many billions. You guys pay this billions. And these are the rules. It's a free trade bloc. We're working on these AI things together. And countries like China and Russia that are not democracies can't join. And this could incentivize teetering democracies like Hungary, which fortunately has just evicted Orban, to go a certain way. And then they would rejoin the democracies. And countries like Chile or Argentina that are, between different camps, they might want to align with us. So I would love to see a new president. And I think if Vance cares so much about Western civilization, as he says that he does at the Munich Security Conference, then he should be willing to put his money where his mouth is and promote a democratic Western Christian civilization, which pools resources on topics like AI and the use of force, rather than this crazy unilateralism, which is beyond international law and actually illegal under American law.
And exactly that. But so Vance is vice president cannot do that right now. He just can't. He
Of
can't
course, no,
even.
only a president could.
Right. But if he were even under those words, he would be shunned from the administration and suddenly you wouldn't hear it. Because so how does he come out of this vice presidentship and run on a campaign like that? Is he really able to do that? Is he really
Well,
able
he's cast himself as an isolationist, but I think that he and Rubio have emerged stronger because they said we didn't want to have pointless military adventures for no reason, right? And he could say, look, this wasn't something that I supported and it didn't work. I want to focus not only on things at home from, you know, steel and coal jobs, which he seems to love, but I know healthcare is a topic that you care about.
enormously?
And he could try to pivot towards a more consensus based politics. What's unfortunate about the MAGA isolationist wing of the Republican Party is that they don't get that their civilizational values only work if we can bring our European and democratic allies with us. In other words, if these are civilizational values, well, we've got to get the Europeans, the Japanese, and those Latin American democracies that are functioning to work with us. And we should pool resources on AI, freedom of navigation, all of these goals. And I think that there's an opportunity here. I mean, Trump isn't going to do this. So it kind of feels like fantasy, but I know you care about solutions in the way that I do. On my disorder podcast, I mention the solution even when I know it's not going to happen. So if magically I got invited to 10 Downing Street and then to the White House and they said, Jason, we really screwed up. What should we do now? I'd say you need to order the disorder. And that's the tagline of my podcast. Invite all the allies together, get a pot of money together, and make a force. And this is the force that we're going to do freedom of navigation. We're going to sanction these kind of Iranian cargoes. But if the Iranians go 6 months and don't attack any neutral shipping, we're going to give them this reward. We're going to help rebuild this gas plant. We're going to help them work on civilian nuclear. If they allow inspections of their nuclear sites and they pass them, we're going to gradually lift sanctions. There's a million things that could be done here. We actually have a lot of cards that we don't play. And their economy is in tremendous trouble. We can't let them demand ransom in Bitcoin for ships passing the straits, but we can, working with our allies, have a reward-based system whereby either allowing freedom of navigation or going X number of months without killing any protesters, they get certain kinds of sanctions relief. I mean, this is not rocket science. It's what 21st century diplomacy has to be.
It really is. And my question is, and like you said, we are in a fantasy. The fantasy is the way to go now because this isn't. We're in, I guess, some other people's version of a fantasy with Trump as the leader of the free world. That he's really moving forward on things they only dreamed of. But now let's go back to moving forward on things like solutions. And like you said, freeing up Iran's economy will only give those that this is a new generation of Iran the power to grow economically and be a world force and be a partner with the West. So how the next president, the next Democratic candidate, if they take Jason Pack to be their advisor, and you have some incredible solutions, better than any of even mine. Imagine if they did that, and we could possibly reverse this storm we're in.
It's tough. So everything that I stand for and believe in was easier to do in 2012 than it was in 2016, and easier to do in 2016 than it is now in 2026. Things have gotten harder. And I want to point out to people that the role of the US in the global economy has decreased. You know, at the end of World War II, we have 48% of global manufacturing. At the end of the Cold War, it's sitting at like 30%. Now it's like 19%. That's a huge amount. It's more than all the European countries put together, but it's not the pure dominance that we've had previously. The New York Stock Exchanges are still the biggest equity markets in the world, right? And people want to access the ability to invest in the US. We have the SWIFT code system, and oil is mostly, traded in what we call petrodollars, meaning that to to trade crude oil, the contract, if you're a Chinese company and you want to buy Saudi oil, you buy it in dollars. But we've got to act soon because soon there's going to be petro yuan and they're going to have an ability to do that transaction in renminbi. So what I would suggest is to reinvigorate new kinds of 21st century global institutions. And on my podcast, the Disorder Podcast, we build on what I talk about in my book. And this is the concept of the global enduring disorder, that since the end of the Cold War, we haven't built new institutions and new ways of doing things to coordinate solutions to collective action problems. What are collective action problems? Anything where you need multiple different stakeholders to work together. Climate change is one, regulating AI, tax havens. These are all collective action problems. Fascinatingly, since America defeated the Soviet Union, we have just seeded the ground for private individuals, corporations in different countries to do whatever they want on these collective action problems. So I'd like to see a centrist candidate, and I don't want it to be a left Democrat because I don't think that it can work with, for example, higher taxes and DEI and, woke this and that. It's got to be hard-nosed. The things that are actually going to get the job done and are going to get our allies to want to work with us to solve these challenges.
And like you said, and I'm not promoting candidates, I don't think Tulsi Gabbard is the person to run the national security agencies. I've even made the joke, if I pop quizzed her at the local Starbucks in DC, tell me the 18 agencies you're supposed to be reporting on every morning. I don't know that she'd be able to name about 11 of them.
But I will have a better reason to eliminate her. So, I had my Fulbright scholarship in Syria, and Fulbright is the most prestigious congressionally funded U.S. scholarship. When I was in Syria, she was coordinating with the Assad regime to undermine American interests. That's treason. And it's obviously clear that Donald does treason 5 times before breakfast. But why did we appoint this woman who was working on behalf of Russian interests in Syria?
And the confirmation, if she had any value, it was Syria. And the sad part about it was Syria and the Assad family fell before she ever got appointed. So I didn't even understand that.
But that should be enough that she should have been out at that moment.
Right. She should have been, but they forged forward with her. So I don't understand the agenda. I don't even know if Donald Trump understands the agenda. And it's okay. Like I said, we all want the captain of the ship to bring the ship home. Great. No issue with that.
And I think it's really important as we're criticizing him to say there were aspects of the hostage deal that he achieved that Biden couldn't have. There were aspects of dropping the bunker buster, which is where we started our conversation, that were courageous and good and could have been used to jumpstart diplomacy. So he has some correct instincts at certain times, but the problem is he doesn't listen to advice. Apparently, many people, Republicans, on the Joint Chiefs and others said, "Oh, I don't know, boss. I think that we shouldn't do exactly this. This is going to lead to this." And he said, "Oh, I don't want to hear about it. Boss, they might close the straits." And he said, "Oh, I don't think they will." He actually said he didn't think they were going to do that.
Well, you say he doesn't listen to advice, and I say I think he listens to the advice of Jared Kushner, Pete Hegseth. I'm not so sure, as much as I like Marco Rubio in a lot of ways, I'm not so sure he's a formidable force within the administration. So I don't think he really has to listen to the advice of Marco Rubio. I mean, Pete Hegseth is this, I guess you would say, dominating force, and he seems to like his way. And then Jared Kushner, of course, has always been his son-in-law for the longest time and has always revered and respected him. And so he does listen to advice. It's just from the wrong people.
There's a transactionalism. I mean, I don't think that the war has failed in Iran due to corruption. But if you look at who trades Brent crude futures 10, 15, 20 minutes before Donald makes various announcements and this war, there has definitely been insider trading. You tell me that some guy made $550,000 on Polymarket predicting the day the war would start, but it was totally kosher. It's crazy. Of course, he had inside information. No one would risk $300,000. Oh, I think the war is going to start, unless he knew insider information that the war is going to start. So hopefully, when a new person comes in, we're talking about solutions, there'll be some kind of Nuremberg for this administration, because we can't get to a situation where Joe Biden pardons Hunter and Trump pardons all of his sons and friends, and just everyone is, beyond the law. We've gotta reel this back. America was supposed to be a place where there's the rule of law.
Absolutely. The only thing I see with that whole idea of starting to prosecute was kind of like when the Obama administration said we're not going to prosecute for torturing. Sooner or later, we've got to bury the hatchet with these and somehow bring America back to working together. I mean, if we could, Trump came in with the one agenda of vengeance. He was mad at Democrats for pursuing him for 4 years when he wasn't president. And vengeance is a big part of his life. It's a
Yep.
big significant role in his life. He loves revenge. Now we go into this mode where let's start over, let's reset. And if the next president starts doing, like you said, starts trying people for war crimes and financial crimes, you're really going against a lot of people that possibly could forge this part of alliance in America where we do rethink and rebuild. So I think some of it we're going to have to let go. Unfortunately, some of it we're going to have to let go.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we need to unify, and whether it's the independent candidates that we both find very important, or maybe not prosecuting some people, but reestablishing a sense of what America is supposed to be about, the values and, rule of law that's supposed to underpin our society.
Absolutely. We got to get back to that. We're not there at all. And I just think when the next president comes in, he needs to be open minded in the idea of reining in. I don't even know how he would do it because, like you said, it's fantasy land. But I mean, Donald Trump did it in a way. He brought on Robert F. Kennedy, a Democrat. I mean, I don't know how the next administration will do it, but he might have to bring in some MAGA people onto his cabinet. I don't
For
know.
sure. And I would have loved if in 2020 Biden had selected someone like Kasich, the moderate Ohio Republican.
Yeah, I remember him as a candidate. He was fantastic.
Yeah. Not only fantastic, but just very unobjectionable. So I used to think that a Mitt Romney or McCain were not the right people to be president. And now I think that was wrong. They would have been excellent. So if there is a new generation of McCain or Romney style Republicans, it would behoove the next Democrat candidate to choose someone like that as a running mate, as a cabinet person, to just try to get the Lincoln Project people on board, And this is what Abraham Lincoln himself did in 1864. People forget this. He didn't run as a Democrat. Excuse me. He didn't run as a Republican, as a grand old party in 1864. He ran as a Republican in 1860. But in 1864, he abolished that ticket and ran under the National Unity Party to get anti-slavery Democrats to support him. And yeah, that was only for one electoral cycle, but it was an olive branch that the changing of the semiotics of the situation allowed Lincoln to be such a amazing leader and unifier. There's nothing to have prevented Biden or Harris in saying, you know what? I'm picking a Lincoln Project Republican as my running mate. They could have, they just didn't.
Right. And you know what's interesting about that is as crazy as it may seem, I would, at this point in time, looking at what I've seen and have seen and hopefully we'll see, I would like to see maybe Marco Rubio run for president. And maybe he be that voice of reason in the next cycle. As much as I don't think he has as much blood on his hands as some of the other administrators in the
Sure. And he may have compromised himself. I mean, the thing is, I don't know how much he does things because he's forced to, So, yes, I think that he's probably very smart and his heart is on the right place, both on Ukraine and on NATO.
Right. Where
But
we're really lost in two areas.
but he's been forced to say and do things that have very much compromised him.
But again, we've got to put the past behind us if we're gonna move forward. We've got to put the past behind us. We can't go into this with a vendetta for everybody within the Trump circle. We can't.
And to strengthen your point, we should look at what's just happened in Hungary. So over the weekend of April 11, April 12, Viktor Orban, the initial neo-populist dictator who was in power for 16 years, was ousted by Peter Magyar. And Magyar is a center-right guy who used to work with him. And I thought it was a genius thing when the Hungarian opposition put him forward, because they could have put forward a young woman or a left-wing activist or whatever. But by putting forward a center-right guy who is himself, fairly anti-migrant and on his side in terms of Christianity and the culture war and whatever, but is just against all the corruption and pro-Putin nonsense of Orban.
Right.
It was a genius way to pull away those who felt that they had to vote for Orban. And it worked. So maybe the Dems should actually run the most center-right person that they can.
And I don't see them doing that, but maybe the Republicans should do it. The Dems are thick-headed, more so than the Republicans. I'm being honest with you when I tell you that. I ran as a Democrat. Granted, my run was ridiculous, was too big a run for a first run. It was U.S. House of Representatives. But talking to them on a daily basis, I realized I can't talk to them on a daily basis. I can't do it. And I can honestly talk to Republicans on a daily basis. Your average, everyday American Republican is center right. Whereas the Dems are so convinced of people like, they all call her AOC. I always say, is that another obnoxious child? Because I call her Andrea Ocasio-Cortez because I can't use the acronym, how she's so revered with the acronym, that if she becomes like a running mate for somebody, I'm done with that whole campaign. If it's Gavin Newsom, is not my guy. So
not my guy, but he's not as crazy as AOC. He doesn't have horrible foreign policy positions.
No, he doesn't have horrible, and he doesn't have horrible governing positions. The problem is that we've got to appeal. We've got to have Reagan Democrats in order to,
of course,
we've got to appeal to America as a whole, not continue this whole left versus right, the Hatfields versus the McCoys. We got to get past that.
Yep. I only have a few more minutes.
I understand. I could talk forever, and I appreciate your time. But like you said, we're going to stay in contact through this.
So here's my last kind of global take. I live in London. I host this Disorder podcast. It's one of the top 20 podcasts here in the UK. I have listenership in America. That's obviously where I'm from, as you can tell from my accent. I see a world in which partisan loyalty is diminishing. It used to be that 80% of Brits would tell you they want to vote for either the Tories or for Labour. Now, when you look at voting intention, less than 40% say that they strongly identify with either Labour or the Tories. They identify with the Greens, with the Lib Dems, with the SNP, with Plaid. The reality is, even in a two-party first-past-the-post style system like the UK, we're in a world where so much has changed. People are not wanting to attach to those old labels. So in America, yes, the parties have all the funding and all the mega donors and the ballot access, but people need to come to them from outside the establishment and be willing to bring new ideas on taxing Silicon Valley companies and regulating, hate speech online and all of the big issues from healthcare to social media. And I think that American public is going to be ready for it. People want change. They really do. And if that change comes from the radical center, I think it could be very successful.
Absolutely, 100%. And the independent movement, the radical center and the independent movement. And as I guess it's an old saying, I've heard it somewhere, don't waste a good crisis. This is the time. This is the time to move forward with just that, the center right, the radical center, the independent movement. Let's get past the red versus blue. This is the time to do it in America and change the world, really, because America does set the tone for the world in a lot.
It sure does. And everything interacts. So if we could have that change in America, it could lead to a new era of coordination with our allies.
Hey, absolutely good. And Jason, you've been incredible. And I'm really looking forward to staying in contact, just like you said, because my thing is not to bash one party or the other. My thing is to come to solutions and bring America back on some sort of level, moderate. This is a lot for me. This is a lot for me, what's going on today in America. So I really appreciate it. If you want to wrap it up, talk about the Disorder one more time, the Disorder podcast, because that's an incredible podcast that I've watched often. And then we're going to get our stuff out. If you want
Primarily audio podcast called Disorder. We do have a YouTube. You can get that at Disorder Podcast. I host it with a Scottish woman, Jane Kinnenmont, who is the head of the UN Organization of the UK. I have another co-host who is a BBC presenter, Mark Lobel. We talk about global affairs from climate change to Ukraine to Gaza to, whatever's going on in the news, but we try to delve deeper and find those solutions that would order the disorder. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm really concerned about collective action. In other words, problems that can only be solved if we work together. So check out the Disorder Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you so much, Jason Pack, the Disorder Podcast. It's been incredible. I feel like I'm in the big league now. Thank you so much, Jason.
Nice to hear you. I've got to run, but I'll talk to you
Go,
later.
go. Have a great day. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Bye.